Working? Yes. Okay. Hi, my name's Mike Ferguson. I've lived in Oxford for years and years and years and years and years with my family. Um, the reason why I'm doing this video is to sort of tell you my story about how a so-called social housing provider, A2Dominion, basically devastated our lives, our hopes, and our dreams. When they never had any grounds to do so. The story starts, and this has been going on for about 11 years now. Back in 2004, they owned the property next door to mine, and we'd reached this point in our lives where it was something we can sort of have the choice of going out and doing our own thing. One way to finance that was to just build a basement flat underneath, convert the coal cellar into a flat, and use the rent to pay the mortgage and stuff like that. So that's what we did. The works caused some slight cracking on the property next door, A2Dominion's property. But the tenant in there, what a woman. Maybe this is another story for another video, but essentially, when my kid was 11, 12, whatever, he was cheeky to her because his ball went in the front garden. She chased him, and the only place he could go was into the house, and she pushed past the door into my house and attacked my son in my room, hitting him. I wasn't there to see any of that, but like I said, maybe that's another story for another video perhaps. Anyway, the main point is that once we started doing the works and the slight crackings started to appear, like I said, you can hardly see some of them. And there are pictures of these cracks on my website, dominionoveryou.com. I'll show you the data. It's in paragraph 96 or 95, I think. However, A2Dominion had the Party Wall Award in place. I had signed saying that I would rectify any damages, pay reasonable costs for surveyor's fees and all that sort of stuff. And that was in place, right? They didn't have to do what they did next. Anyway, I was running low on money, so the work went as expeditiously as possible. That's the word they use. And it meant basically that there was times when the work just stopped. But no surveyor, none of my surveyors or party wall surveyor on their side mentioned any harmful effects to the property if the work remained uncompleted for a while. So that's what happened. But then something changed. Something changed very, very fundamentally. They had the party wall in place. They then went and started a claim against me in court. Now, it transpired that Mr. War, Mr. Gildersleeve's sidekick, Mr. Gildersleeve is the property assistant director of property services, and Mr. War is the repairs manager, went to their property and put together a report that he said that the property required somewhere in the region of £59,000 worth of repairs. Now, the repairs, because of that cost, the property was suitable for disposal. That's what he told the council, and that's what he told the tenant at the time. Now, the reason why he did all of this is because the tenant was complaining, fair enough, and she had put in 2 applications previously, or somewhere around about that, to be transferred, and didn't move, and got turned down because for whatever reasons. As it turns out, probably not enough housing points, and she didn't qualify. But this time, on the third, possibly second or third application, or the fourth, I don't know, she was moved. Now, A2Dominion had to concoct a plan in order for her to move. Now, the way they did this was that they put this report together, claiming there's £59,000 worth of repairs, said the property was suitable for disposal, and then linked the court case that they started against me to the repairs, implying that my words caused £59,000 worth of repairs. It was a total lie, fabrication. Um, then you look at the list of repairs, you see there's things like a new kitchen, new bathroom, new sound and thermal installation, new water services, so services supply, um, uh, paint and decorate. None of this was related to my work. In fact, none of it was actually structural. It was all just superfluous, not superfluous, but things that needed to be done to the property because they're quite old Victorian properties around here. But I was not responsible for that. So what Mr. Ward then did was inserted the report into the A2Dominion rehousing process so that he could get the tenant moved out. So in order to do that, apparently they needed the council's permission. So he had put this report implying that we were responsible for the links and that the court case had been started against us for it. And they put it into the A2Dominion rehousing process, and then got one Lorinda Hornblower who interfaced with the council to get what they call a decant, so that the tenant could be moved out of the property, quickly ahead of everybody else. So, in other words, the decant is a permission that allows the tenant to jump the housing queue ahead of everybody else, whatever it is whichever part of Oxford that they want to live in. So the thing about it was, right, that Mr. Waugh, this is still back in 2006, Mr. Waugh asked their surveyors, WCJ, Mr. Sumner, to produce a report about the property and I guess to see what the state of it was. Mr. Sumner turned around and said to Mr. Waugh that the property is not in disrepair, right? And it is safe to live in. And it was never, ever unsafe, and it was not in disrepair. And again, if you go to the dominionoveryou.com website, you can see the pictures of it all. But he ignored that. Mr. Waugh ignored all of that. Now, A2Dominion went all the way to Surrey to hire a firm of Surrey-based surveyors to come to Oxford to look after a property that was basically a domestic issue between two homeowners, right? Why would you get Surrey-based surveyors to come up here? What do they know about Oxford soil conditions and things like that? Anyway, they did. And he had said that the property is safe to live in and it is not in disrepair. Mr. Waugh ignored that totally, just blanked him off. Anyway, in March 2006, before that, we had the environmental health come round and inspect the property because, like I said, it was running low on funds. And we couldn't progress the work as fast as we would like. So they looked at the property under the Housing Act 1985 and 2004, and they assessed it under the Housing Health and Safety Regulating System, something like that. But they found nothing that warranted their intervention. Right, it was all clear, right? Which supports Mr. Sumner, which is what the case was, and I knew that. But then they started this claim against me. Now, the only money that they spent on their property was somewhere in the region of 650 quid, because the cracks had emanated up, and the hairline cracks had emanated up to the ceiling, and so they replaced the ceilings in the front rooms of the rooms upstairs in the house. So that was all the money that they'd spent. They hadn't spent any fees on it or anything by that time. But as a result of Mr. Waugh's report being put into the system, Mrs. Hornblower, Mr. Waugh then turns around and tells echoes Mr. Sumner's opinion about the state of the property to Mrs. Hornblower. So Mrs. Hornblower knew what the property was like, what the condition of it was, and that what the surveyors were saying about it, it's safe to live in and it's not in disrepair. But she took that report, handed it over to the allocations manager in the council, and turned around and said that our surveyors are recommending disposal of the property. Now, unless they haven't released any more documentation, that's not true. Why would a surveyor turn around and say the property is suitable for this for disposal if it's safe to live in and not in disrepair? Mr. Sumner never said that. At least I don't believe he never said that. So anyway, she should have told the truth to the allocations manager. But at the time she put the report into the allocations manager, they couldn't move her. The reason why they did that was because they couldn't move her without having permission from the council to get the decant. So what they then did was put the report in with the landlord tenant information, landlord references and stuff like that. But what it turned out, at the time, she had legal costs in regards to rent arrears, right? You and I both know, or everybody generally knows, that if you've got rent arrears and you've got legal costs because of those rent arrears, the council's not going to move you anywhere. But because Mr. Wall put that report in, and Lorinda Hornblower passed it on to the council, she also passed on the landlord references. Now, what did they say? Because if she's got rent arrears and legal costs in relation to a suspended possession order, they were going to evict her they got the suspended possession order in October 2006, 1 month after they started this claim against me, and Mr. Wall wrote his asked Mr. Sumner to produce his report. They were going to evict her. The whole idea was then, I assume, was to then pass all that cost on to me, which is what they tried to do. Anyway, Lorinda passes the landlord references over and the report over to her. The council turns around and they didn't do any due diligence or check it out properly to see whether or not the property was as described. They just accepted what A2Dominion was saying to them. Hook, line and sinker. And if you look at and the way I'm talking about this, it's as if I knew this prior to going into all of this. I didn't. A2Dominion concealed this from us for nearly 6 years roughly. And the only time they released this extra documentation was 3 days before a March 2012 trial, a few days before that. And it was only at that point did we know. For the last 6 or so years, we never knew anything about this. Never knew why they did it. Even though we had asked them, look, please provide us with information surrounding the rehousing of Mrs. Short. They just ignored us. The solicitors just ignored us. Oh, what a piece of work the solicitors were. My God. Anyway, they put the report in. They got the permission from the council to decant the tenant. And in 2007, June 2007, the tenant was moved out. There was a proviso, a caveat on the decant permission that the council gave A2Dominion. And that was that if you decide to keep hold of the property, let us know, because that would change her status. In other words, the status would not be valid anymore. It would not be valid because, why does she need an emergency decant when you're still holding the property? You're going to dispose of it. Dispose of it. Anyway, it turned out that they didn't dispose of the property. What they did was they boarded it up for nearly 4.5 years and then tried to stiff me for the lost rent. And I'm thinking, there's something really off, really off about this. And what it turned out is that through freedom of information requests and stuff like that, I found out that if a social housing provider is going to dispose of a property, they need to get consent from the Secretary of State at the time, which now is the housing regulator. And I put in a freedom of information request to the regulator, and the regulator says A2Dominion Homes Limited, which is the charitable branch of A2Dominion in Oxford, has put in requests 5 times before thereabouts to dispose of properties. Makes you wonder what conditions were about those. but they never put in a request to dispose of the property next door. So the inference being is if they had any intention of disposing of the property, they would have had to have done that, but they didn't even put in an application to the housing regulator to have the property for consent for the property to be disposed of. But they told the council that they were going to dispose of the property. They even earmarked the property on their systems. I think Orchard, I think it's called, that the property is a management void and it is not to be a relet, right? And it is to be disposed of. That's what they set on their systems. That's what they told the tenant that was living next door, and that's what they told the council. But did they do that? No, they didn't do that. They just closed the property up, boarded it up to make it look like it was uninhabitable, and then tried to stiff me and my family for the lost rent. Oh, what? And then tried to hide all of this, tried to hide all of it. And I tell you, I wasn't in a good place. I can tell you headwise, I was not in a good place. So basically, what happened is Mr. Waugh, with the full consent of his boss, committed procedural impropriety. They bent the rules and regulations around rehousing a tenant so that she can move out. The most violent, one of the violent women in the, at least as far as I'm concerned, on this planet, to get her out so that she can go and live somewhere nearer to the rest of her families and stuff. And then try to pursue me for the lost rent. It turns out that the when they closed the property, because it cost £59,000 to, Mr. Waugh says it cost £59,000 to repair this property, and therefore it's going to be disposed of because it's too expensive. They then got rid of the tenant, tried to pass the cost of the lost rents and stuff that they weren't getting from the property to me, and in their witness statements against me in court for the March 2012 trial, they were turning around and saying that the property is going to suffer from continual movement. It'll be constantly, foundations will be moving constantly, and therefore we'll be constantly having to repair. That's why we can't relet the property. It was bullshit. Bull. Again, till that time, we didn't know any of this, and we kept asking them, please provide us with the reasons why you rehoused Mrs. Shaw, and we were just ignored. Most of this time, I was trying, I'm not a rich guy or anything like that, and I was just trying to defend this as best as I could as myself. I mean, there have been times when I did have some pro bono help, and when we did have some pro bono help at the Pacific Times, things came out that just made me angry. Oh, something inside me just switched. It was just like, my God, this is how it happens, is it? People do things like this and they make you angry, and then you switch over and bam, that's it. So I said, right, okay, if that's the way the rest of my life is going to go, then I will spend the rest of my life fighting this. Anyway, the solicitors, they were turning around telling us, oh, pay this money for the lost rent, pay this money for the compensation. Oh, that's the other thing, the compensation payment. The recommendation to pay Mrs. Shaw the compensation payment came from the housing allocation manager, Mr. Porter, in Oxford City Council. He then said that to her, said that to Mrs. Hornblower. Next thing you know, she's got £4,000, and they pay off her legal costs and her rent arrears, and then give her the rest of the money. Again, I asked about this for the Freedom of Information request, and I get back a response saying, well, this is a matter of law, and the council has no bearing on anything the council does about it. Why is the allocations manager, Mr. Porter, giving advice that she's entitled to £4,000 under the Land Compensation Act to A2Dominion, who then accept that and then pay her off, and then try to put it in the witness statements to me at court that she was paid the £4,000 as a result of having to move, because of my works making the property uninhabitable, which is what they say in the statement, and that it will continue to be uninhabitable, and that's the reason they can't rent it out. And we haven't done any repairs on it yet because Mr. Ferguson hasn't sorted out the repairs and things. So I'm like, but in 2004, A2Dominion became involved, right? By the time they came involved, I had finished underpinning the party wall between our two properties. Their surveyor, they had a structural engineer and a solicitor at the time. Oh, man, a solicitor, Mr. Woodruff. Mr. Gildersleeve authorized a central city firm of commercial solicitors, Maclay, Murray and Spence, to come and get one of their partners, turn over hundreds of millions or something like that, 100, 200 million or something like that a year, to come all the way from London to Oxford to deal with something that was a regional domestic dispute between homeowners, right? Why would you get a solicitor all the way from London to come down to here for something that's a domestic reason? It's a commercial firm of solicitors, not a domestic issue. And anyway, he made me stop work and sign things and documents and all that kind of stuff and put together another party wall award attempt and get it in place. And I'm like, well, okay, fair enough. I'll do it. I'll, come in, inspect the place, do whatever you need to do. Just let me get on with it so I can finish it off. It took nearly a year to put the party wall in place. Why? What the hell was their surveyor doing? I don't know. Anyway, so we put the court case was coming up, and the pressure that I was put under, my family put under, just to pay the rent, something like 70, 80, 90, 100 grand. I said, no, I'm not paying that. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And they kept saying, pay this, pay that, pay this. And I said, no. So they tried to, because they tried to put in what they call a summary judgment application into the courts, which means that there's no evidence to be looked at. It's just what's paperwork in front of this judge. That the judge then was to make a decision on that paperwork. But what it transpired was that there was a solicitor, Mrs. Walsh. She was the woman that was managing the claim on behalf of A2Dominion, right? And what it turned out, and she weaved the story that my words was making the property uninhabitable, and the property, the foundations weren't stable, the stability of the property was in question, and all that sort of stuff, when we knew it was never that. When I hired another surveyor, Jonathan Longdon, who looked over the paperwork, he said that in the report, and it's there in the reports, that the excavations that I he did not accept that made the property unsafe, right? The property was not unsafe. So you had all that body of evidence that their surveyor had said was that made the property was safe and not in disrepair. And the council, environmental health people saying the same thing in effect, right? Mrs. Walsh, the solicitor to read this story, turned around and said, oh, we had to ask for further assistance from Mr. Sumner, the surveyor, and Mr. War to help progress this claim against us. So basically, the £650 that they spent, which is what they started the original claim for, they then amended the claim to include the lost rent and the £4,000 compensation payment and the moving costs. And they got Mr. Sumner to change his view. He changed his view. He went from saying the property is safe and not in disrepair to it's not safe, it's this, and there's a threat to human life and all that kind of stuff, and we've got to make sure everybody's safe and things like that. What? Again, this was me looking at it with a bit of hindsight. And it turned out that because Mr. Sumner was the party wall surveyor before, he had all the information about the property to hand. He had it all there. It was all there, right? So he then was asked by, I assume, Walsh, to assist in the amended claim for the lost rent and everything against us. And he had to write two reports, an expert witness report and a witness statement. Right? In the witness statements, that's when we discovered he says the property is unsafe and it's possible we have to make it safe for people walking up their path. Now, their path, my house is on this side, their house is on this side. Their path is there to their doorway. My path is there to the door, and there's a 4.5 meter gap in between, about 4.5 meter gap in between. How can you, taking out the clay at my part of the building, make the walkway unsafe, which is total rubbish. Anyway, it turns out that Mr. Sumner said, I had to go and do a number of schedules of work, once-off repairs, and I had to do the witness statement, and we had to do the expert witness report for litigation purposes, for which he had all the information to hand. And when you look at looking back over it, you look at some of the stuff, he did virtually nothing, apart from write the reports and the expert witness report. And for that, I had to pay an extra £10,500, which I am still obligated to pay now. So he compromised his professional integrity for money. Yeah? And the reason why he did that, because what the solicitors, Mrs. Walsh, probably must have told him was that we don't see the claim defendants having any prospects of defending this claim. So they did this because they thought they could get away with it, right? And it's an abuse of position, power, everything. They just did it because they thought they could get away with it. They just did it. Didn't matter what lives they were devastating. That didn't come into it. They didn't need to do any of this. They didn't need to stiff me for the lost rent. They didn't need to do any of that. The property was safe. They were told it was safe. Yet you offer an inducement or maybe even a bribe of some description to Mr. Sumner, who then changes his professional opinion to try and back your story up in the courts against me 5-6 years later down the road. Oh, what? Anyway, it turned out that when we got to court, right? So no, just before that, the solicitor, Mrs. Walsh, the woman we kept asking for asking for information about the rehousing of the tenant, we kept asking, and then after the summary judgment was over, we managed to get a stay, and Dave, God help him, lent me some money to, God bless him, lent me some money to try and fight it there and then. The solicitors got a stay, and well, soon afterwards, I sent an email to Mrs. Walsh to say, I was going to ask again, can we have the information around the rehousing tenant? And again, we were ignored. And I sent her another email, and then there was an out of office reply. All of a sudden, she no longer worked for A2Dominion. Now, it could be for totally different reasons why she's left A2Dominion. I mean, McLean, Murray and Spence. But I think it's rather fortuitous that it happened at that point in time when she agreed to stay. And I was going to go and talk to her. And you can go onto the Law Society website and find out where solicitors are working and stuff like that. And I did phone them up, and I phoned the society up, and I spoke to the archivist. And one of the things that came out in our conversation was that Mrs. Walsh hadn't given the Law Society a reason why she left MMS, McLean, Murray and Spence. And the archivist asked me to remind her, and I'm like, well, I don't know if I should be actually trying to talk to her or not. I don't know. Anyway, I decided not to. But that just sort of added to my suspicions about why she left. Anyway, this other solicitor took over responsibility for it. Miss something, I can't even pronounce her name. It's an Indian woman. And then they were back on this trail. Pay this money, pay us 60, 70, 80, 100 grand, whatever it was. Pay. Or we will take you to court and we will make you pay that way. So she starts a multi-track trial, which is the most expensive, ruinous route possible. And my solicitor, when we look back over this stuff, and then I'll come back onto that in a minute, that she starts the multi-track trial. This was in May 2011. Right? So they start the trial again, and all the time she's hammering me, and I almost broke under the pressure to agree something. And I was like, no, don't do this, Mikey. Don't do this. So I didn't. Anyway, she started the course, the multi-track trial process, and part of the process is that you set a court diary of things that you're supposed to do. Two of those things was document disclosures. You have to release all documents, no matter how detrimental they are to your case, and you must exchange witness statements at a certain time. Now, because I'm one man, I put together my own court bundle. Man, that's a lot of work. Almost soul destroying. I put away my own court bundle. I then asked for a month's delay. They asked me for a month's delay. I said, yeah, that's fine. I asked them for a month's delay, and then the judge said this is the final time of the delay, all right, which was December 2011. So I phoned her up and said, are you ready to exchange witness statements? She turns around and says to me, are you ready to exchange witness statements? What? Sorry? Yeah, of course I am. And then I get next email, oh, you shouldn't have turned around and said to me, you're ready to exchange witness statements when you're not. And I said, but I am ready to exchange witness statements. So I just filed it. It turned out that she hadn't bothered to prepare. She started in May 2011, threatening me, well, not threatening me, sorry, wrong word to use, pressuring me to settle, and hadn't bothered to prepare for the trial that was coming up to meet the deadlines of the diary. So I file. She turns around and says, oh, can we have a month to put together our witness statements? I said, no, in my mind, you should have done that ages ago. So I said, no. And she said, well, can we have a week? And I said, no. Oh, that means I've got to go to court and do. And I said, that's not my fault. You've got to have to go into court and do it yourself. So they went to court. The hearing was in February 2012. The court case was in March 12th. So basically 4 weeks. She only managed to get her witness statements into their claim 4 weeks before the trial. And not only that they tried to make me pay for her mistakes, that I was supposed to pay for all of this stuff. It's like when they put in the amended claim, Mrs. Walsh was supposed to tell me that they put in the amended claim, so therefore they would bear the cost for it because it was their amendment, not mine. But they didn't tell me that. They didn't put that forward to me. Oh, what the hell's going on? So anyway, it turned then 3 days before the main trial on March 12th. 3 days before, they released all these documents called the 59 pages, the stuff that I've been asking them about before in regards to the rehousing of Mrs. Shaw, right? And even when they released all of that, then it became, with a little bit of pro bono help, it became apparent that they had lied or not told the truth about the property. And that Mr. Waugh and Mr. Sumner and Mr. Gildersleeve and Lorinda Hornblower and the solicitors, and I'm pretty damn sure they knew. They must have known. At least if they didn't know then, they must have known now after the story. 6, 7, 8, 9 years down the road, they know what the story is. They know what their solicitor had done, Mrs. Walsh, to weave this whole story and got this Mr. A2Dominion and Mr. Sumner, their surveyor, to be party to it all. So that they could then put a false claim against me. And when we get to court, put a claim against me, 3 days, we release all the documentation. And when they get to court, guess what they do? They drop the lot, near enough, the whole rent thing, they drop the rent, they drop the compensation payment and the moving costs. They just drop it at the door of the court at the very last minute. Years and years and years of, God, you don't know how much they pushed me over the edge. Years and years of it, and they just dropped it all. My God. The judge at the trial says, well, there's no litigation here. There's never been any litigation. There was none done because A2Dominion dropped their claim. They went in expecting somewhere in the region of about £52,000 from me, came out with 9K, which would have been the original amount if A2Dominion were upfront and honest with me to start with back in 2007 when they first put the application in. However, because Mr. War put this report together that was a falsity, implying that my words caused the property to be the property needed £59,000 worth of repair. Because he'd done it, if he'd been honest with me at that point, then we wouldn't have to be paying anything. Now get this: if A2Dominion had sold the property like they told the council they would do, right, and they told the tenant they would sell the property, and that the reasons why they're selling it because it's not to standard, blah 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 blah. If they had done that, there would never have been the court case because that was all supposed to happen back in 2006. But they didn't do that. The years of stress because of A2Dominion on my family need not have happened if they had done what they said they were going to do to the council, which was dispose of the property. They earmarked it on the systems for disposal, everything. It was ready to be disposed of, but they just didn't do it. They just put it up for 4.5 years. And guess what? After the trial was over, they onboarded it up and fixed it up. They spent £74,000 thereabouts on repairing the property, which was somewhere in the region of £15,000 more than what Mr. War had said the property required back in 2006. And that was the reasons for its disposal in the first place. Oh, what's going on, man? They tried to stiff me and they tried to bully me and pressure me and every thing that they could do to get me to concede to basically what is an abusive position. They committed, Mr. War, with the full authorization of the company, committed procedural impropriety. It's as simple as that. And that's something we're going to have to address with the council and the housing regulator. Then there's the solicitors which weave this story. That's something we're going to have to address with the Solicitors Regulation Authority. And then there's the Mr. Sumner's alteration of his professional opinion for more money when he didn't have to. That's something we're going to have to address with the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and stuff like that. Like I said, I'm in this for life. They take my houses. I've got no choice if they do that, they will can. Anyway, the judge says, right, okay. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. Let's strip out the costs in relation to the bit that they dropped, right? At the time, if I'd known what to say and done, we could have examined this question, but I didn't. And these solicitors, these people, they're not supposed to take advantage of third parties. It's exactly what they did with me. And we strip out the costs. So strip out the costs for the bits that they dropped, and then that's what Mr. Ferguson pays. I'm like, what? This has gone on before they even started the claim. Why should I be paying anything? So anyway, you get the bill of costs from Mr. Woodruff. My God, £190,000. Now the pro bono helper had at that time turned around and said, it must mean that the A2Dominion solicitors had charged them somewhere in the region of £250,000, £250,000, probably nearer £300,000 for something that was only worth 650 quid to start with. That's absurd. That's absurd. They charged £300,000. So we had to, because of the £192,000, what they reckon they reduced the bill from whatever it was to 190, meant that we had to go to the Royal Courts of Justice to deal with this. Went to the Royal Courts of Justice. The judge looked at them and said, nobody gives solicitors a checkbook, which is exactly what A2Dominion did. And not only was it Gildersleeve and Warren, now it's the peers, the higher up bosses, because I can't see how you can spend £300,000 or thereabouts on a legal claim for something that was only worth 650 quid thereabouts. You could buy a whole new house for that. Let alone you board up the property for nearly 4.5 years, a viable property that you keep off the social housing market. It's a viable property and you keep it off the social housing market when Oxford has an acute housing crisis and you keep it off the market. Anyway, the judge at the Royal Courts of Justice, he called it McLean Murray Spence solicitors monkeys. Well, monkeys could do things faster and quicker and better than they could. And my solicitor tells me that raises alarm bells because having been stripped by A2Dominion to 190,000, it got stripped down to 60,000. Right now, even I'm a layperson. Even I'm like, what the hell? That's incredible. So anyway, they put this thing in called a part 36 offer. Basically, all I think that was there for was to hedge their bets. They went to court expecting £52,000, right? The McLean Murray Spence mismanaged the case completely, and they came out with a lot less than they were expecting. So they didn't want the same thing to happen with legal fees. So they put this part 36 means the judge makes a decision what the value is. If I beat the part 36, then they pay their own costs, I pay my own, net out any differences and stuff. But which I didn't beat the part 36, it meant I had to pay all the legal fees from the ending of the court session to the assessment of costs, and including the assessment of costs. Again, that was expensive and then was reduced. It was all just this woman, Miss Civ, the one that took over, Civ's, whatever her name, just made everything as expensive and expensive. And she lost focus, and I think she was pissed off because she got caught out not doing her job. Anybody else got caught doing that stuff. You're supposed to do a job and you don't do it. We got fired a long time ago. But somehow she managed to stay there and pressure my family into it, knowing that she was wrong. Absolutely wrong to do this. Absolutely wrong. So now, because of historical issues and stuff, they've got £140,000 now. They're going to put on my property. They have put on my property. I tried to talk to Andrew Smith about this because this was just so wrong. And just to give an example, right? I went to newspapers about this. Mr. Gildersleeve, again, misleading, false impressions about what actually happened. Like I said, I've got the website about all of that. So he was misleading the newspapers. He wasn't being straightforward with them. And it's constantly misleading. Every time we push the questions to them, they just basically don't tell the truth. They should be telling the truth and they don't. And the culmination of that is that I asked Mr. Andrew Smith to help, and he said, well, obviously he's going to find out what A2Dominion side of the story is. So he asked them, they sent back a letter. The letter says, Mr. Ferguson lost at court. The judge didn't agree with any of his arguments or anything like that at all, which was total humbug. What they must have forgotten about, or maybe didn't realize, is that I had the transcripts for the trial. Right? So I said to Mr. Andrew Smith, look, here's the transcripts of the trial. This is their response, and here's my solicitor's response to this. It's, virtually every paragraph in that letter they respond to is wrong. And the letter came from a Mr. Lyman, which is, I assume, Mr. Gildersleeve's boss. He's a group director of property services, so it must be Mr. Gildersleeve's boss, and who I'm going to be meeting next week on the 8th of May, the day after the election, in East Oxford Community Centre. The meeting set for 12:30. I don't see anything useful coming out of that at all, because they want me to pay the £140,000. There's no way I can do that. Absolutely no way. So the thing about it is that mislead. The letter must have come from the solicitors because Mr. Lyman, I've never met him before. And the other person is Lorinda's Hornblower's boss, I think. I can't remember what her name was. She's coming in, so there's going to be two of them in the community centre on the 8th of May. And we're going to have a talk about all of this. This is the total injustice, big time. And it really is a David and Goliath situation here, because I have done nothing to deserve this. I was helpful as much as possible as I could ever have been. I can't understand why they did that. But basically, the solicitors made mistakes. They did things that they were not supposed to do, and there's a criminal element to probably some of this. Mr. War committed procedural impropriety, falsified a report to say that the property was the repairs of the property was linked to my work, and then fed it into the council, lied to the council. I should have said these words, but hey, they didn't tell the truth to the council. They should have told the truth. And Lorinda Hornblower knew that as well, and she should have told the truth. They didn't. None of them told the truth. None of them. And then they got Mr. Sumner, their surveyor, to change his professional opinion when all the evidence says that the property is safe and it's not unstable and it's not uninhabitable. He changed his opinion to try and support the solicitor's case that they were trying to make against me, which they then drop at court. And still then later on try to create huge amounts of legal fees. What am I supposed to do? Huh? What are we supposed to do? They know I'm not a rich guy, and they hammered and they know that I don't have the money for all of this, and they knew what they were doing was wrong, and they knew everything what had gone on. The solicitors, they know. Mr. Sumner, A2Dominion, they know. I even think the council knows. I went out protesting against the council. They know. They all know. And everybody's hush, quiet about it. I don't seem to be able to break that ice somehow. I need to do that. So anyway, like I said, the website is dominionoveryou.com. Please have a look. If you're not much of a reader, look at the pictures. You can see paragraph 95, 96. You can see the extent of the full extent of the cracks that I caused. And like I said, some of them you can't see. It is unbelievable that they spent this amount of money over something that was only worth 650 quid. And the whole thing was a complete absurdity. It was absurd. And they use public money to do this. That's not what the public money that they get on the cheap is not supposed to be for reasons like that, to cover your backsides. And then try to make me and my family pay for it. You're not supposed to use public money. You're not supposed to get the bigger bosses in your support in that. Well, did you tell them? Did you lie to them? You didn't. Did you tell them that the money was going to be for these purposes? Or was that also concealed from them? Anyway, thanks for listening. That's it. Thanks for listening.